This is Kenny Tan. Welcome to Real Estate License in 14 Weeks. This is episode 39 of Starting from Zero. Today we talk about chapter 13, that's Valuation and Appraisal. If you like my video, please give me a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, hit the bell for future notifications, and share this video with your friends. Principles of value. Principle of supply and demand. Most people know what supply and demand means. Supply is generated by the desire for something, and desire can be created through education and advertisement. Desire must also be backed by purchasing power. So if you have an outlet in a community where there is the right purchasing power from the local residents, it can create a demand for the products that are being sold at the outlets. Principle of change. It is subdivided into several different principles. Number one, principle of integration and disintegration. All properties go through 3 stages of development. Number one, it's called integration, and that is the same thing as development phase. Number two, it's called equilibrium, otherwise known as a static phase. And number three, disintegrated, that is decline or decay. So in order to prevent that from happening, generally speaking, a city in a neighborhood that is really old, that has gone through integration and equilibrium, the city has to do some kind of redevelopment to rejuvenate the neighborhood. So that's what we mean by principle of integration and disintegration. Principle of regression. What is principle of regression? Regression means going backwards. I'll give you an example. If a property in a neighborhood is surrounded by properties of lesser worth. Many years ago, back in 2006, there was a city in Southern California. The city's name is Ladera Ranch. At the peak of the real estate market, many people moved into Ladera Ranch. However, when the market crashed back in 2008 and 2009, many properties on the same street were in foreclosure. As you know, people that are in foreclosure, they don't take care of their properties. As a result, if you're the owner that is surrounded by all of these properties that's going through foreclosure, so what's going to happen is many people don't maintain their lawn, they don't maintain their property. So suddenly you are surrounded by lesser properties. Your property value will decline significantly due to regression. Next, we're going to talk about principle of progression. An example of progression might be that years ago, there was an ugly picture on the front page of a newspaper. It shows a very ugly house in downtown San Francisco. And the purpose of that photo is to demonstrate how hot the market was. And that particular ugly house is surrounded by very expensive properties, nice properties, as a result of which its value goes up with the nicer homes that are built around the area. So when a lesser worth property is surrounded by property of higher quality, its value is also affected by the value. So progression is just the opposite of regression. Principle of substitution. It is tested very frequently in the Department of Real Estate salesperson exam, the principle of substitution. Most buyers apply the principle of substitution when they look at homes. If 2 homes on the same street are of the same quality, one is priced higher than the other, the one that is priced lower is going to get more buyer to come take a look at that property. It is just a simple idea about principle of substitution. So if we look at 2 properties of the same qualities, definitely we don't want to pay for the one that is more expensive. We'll rather choose the one that is less expensive. Principle of highest and best use. Now this talks about net return. If a property is more suitable or is likely to bring you a higher net return by being a residential property. You don't want to build a commercial property on a lot where residential property will bring in higher net return. And that's what we call principle of highest and best use. Principle of increasing and decreasing returns. So when a developer is trying to consider how many units to build on a given lot, generally speaking, if you can build 16 units on a lot, you don't want to build 3 units because that will bring you the least amount of return. But increasing it from 16 to 32 does not necessarily bring you the highest return, because if you have to increase to 30 units, that means that each unit has got a lesser square footage. So the question is, if a property can be developed into 16 units of 1,000 square feet each versus 32 units of 500 square feet each, which one is more beneficial to you? It will depend. Is a 500 unit more marketable, easier to find tenant, or 1,000 square feet unit more marketable, easier to find tenant, will bring in a higher rental value? So the developer will go through this analysis to see whether he should build 16 units or 32 units. That is what we call principle of increasing and decreasing returns. Principle of contribution. If you're a real estate agent, you go to see a seller to sign a listing, and one of the things that you do with the seller is that the seller might ask you, what do I need to do to get my house ready? For example, the property has a rather old carpet. Should the seller remove the old carpet and replace it with something else? And in order to do that, there is a certain amount of money that the seller has to spend. For example, if the seller spent $10,000 in changing the flooring, will he be able to get the $10,000 investment back or even more money? Now, for example, in this case, if I'm a real estate agent, I would definitely advise the seller to replace the flooring, because you know what? Most buyers do not like property that has ugly carpet or the flooring is really, really old. So by spending $10,000, he's going to at least get back the $10,000 that he has, or maybe more, $20,000 or $30,000 more. So that is what we mean by principle of contribution. Now, the opposite of that might be that if the seller is thinking about building a swimming pool in anticipation of selling the property. Now, does building a swimming pool in the backyard create value in the property? In most cases, if you spend $10,000 building a pool, you may not get back all that $10,000. Also, for example, should you remodel the kitchen or should you remodel the bathrooms? Most realtors will tell you that if you have a really outdated or dated kitchen, there is no update, or bathrooms that is old and is so dated, most of the time these type of homes don't sell very well. But what if you invest $5,000 into remodeling the kitchen, or even $10,000 into remodeling the kitchen, and perhaps another $10,000 into remodeling the bathroom? Most likely, you will get all that money back plus more. So in that case, you would definitely want to get your bathrooms remodeled and also your kitchen remodeled. And that is what we mean by principle of contribution. Valuation of the process. Step 1, definition of the problem. And problem can be defined in terms of the property address, the use, the date of valuation, and other value limitations. For example, we need to have the property address. And then as far as the use, it can be for sale of real property, it can be for a litigation. So that use would have to be determined. And the date of the appraisal is very, very important. If we are doing an appraisal for a lawsuit or litigation, then the date is not today's date, is some other date in the past. Whereas if you're doing it for a transaction, The lender is the one that ordered the appraisal. They are more interested in getting the appraisal value as of today. So the date is extremely important. And the definition of value is important because you need to define what the value is in terms of, are you looking for market value or some other types of value? Most of the times we are looking for market value. Whereas when you're doing some other type of appraisal, you are not looking for market value as of today. You might be looking for some other types of values. Step 2, preliminary analysis. That is what we also call the data gathering step. There are 2 types of data you'll be interested in. Number 1 is called the general data. The general data would include social, economic, government, and environmental data. Specific data pertains to the cost, income, and other things like physicalness or locational data concerning the property. Step 3, highest and best use. And this particular step, you will first evaluate the property as if it's a vacant, even though it already has a structure. You will first evaluate it as a vacant lot. The purpose of that is to help identify comparable properties and to determine what would be the use that would generate the most income, the maximum income. Step 2, you will appraise the property with the improvement on the property. The purpose of that is also to identify comparable properties and also to decide whether the existing structure should be demolished. Step 4, land value estimate. Since the land consists of the major part of the value of the property, it is evaluated separately. The comparison approach is the most commonly used approach. Step 5, application of the 3 approaches. The first one is sales comparison. The second one is income capitalization. And the third one is the cost approaches, which you will learn about in the later video. Step 6, reconciliation of value. When you get 3 different values based on 3 different approaches, you would not normally take the average of the 3 values, although you could, but most of the time, you want to make sure that they compare very well. Now, if the values come up to be significantly different, that means that 1 or 2 approaches are not suitable for that particular property. So an appraiser would have to take into many factors to come out with the right value, but the appraiser is not required to take an average. In fact, it might be an exam question in the Department of Real Estate Salesperson exam that an appraiser reconcile the value indication and they do not take an average of the 3 values. And finally, the report or defined value. There are 3 different types of appraisal reports. Number 1 is the letter report, and that's usually simply just 1 page or a couple of pages of a letter. It's in a letter format, and it's very, very simple. It will simply report the appraised value with a little bit of explanation and analysis as to how the value is arrived. Number 2 is the form report. The form report is generally preferred by lenders for most residential loans. The appraiser would use a form report. And the third kind of report is what we call the narrative report. And the narrative report is a very extensive report and usually used in a non-lender situation. For example, if it's a litigation or if it's an eminent domain case where a letter report or form report might not be sufficient, so you will need a narrative report. The narrative report is the most extensive one. In fact, it is a DRE question on the narrative report. This is the end of episode 39 of Starting from Zero. See you next time.